4 Hour Times, episode FOT 20, take 1.
I showed him a card with the word did on it, and he said bib, and so I asked him then to spell it. He said B-I-B. That was a perfect example. Yesterday in the group, I showed him no, and he said on. Was for sore, top for pot, that kind of thing. One is very dysnomic. In other words, she has a difficulty in trying to identify with a specific word or label an object. Such as, instead of saying that this is a desk, she might say this is a table, or this is the thing that we're writing on.
They told me that my son was learning disabled, and that his attention span was very, very short, and that I had to put him on a drug. And I said, but my son is not hyperactive.
The reason why I write my name Joe is because I don't know how to spell Joseph. So not to be caught in the same condition again or the same situation, I had my name legally changed to Joe Peel.
CBS News presents 4 Hour Times. Today, dyslexia, the invisible handicap. Here is CBS News correspondent Douglas Edwards.
Dyslexia, a mysterious perceptual difficulty afflicting 1 American in 10. Whether it's called word blindness or dyslexia, it's a learning disability of such frustrating dimension that many of us can't imagine what it's like to be unable to read, write, and spell effectively. Nor do we know the bitterness it can create. In fact, recent research tells us that 3 out of 4 prisoners suffer from dyslexia. Dyslexics are not retarded or mentally defective. They have average and above average IQs. And there's nothing wrong with a dyslexic's vision. Their problem is that the message the eye sends to the brain gets short-circuited. Actually, a dyslexic's brain is organized differently so that he might see this sentence, warning guard dogs patrol, as this, or like this. Some dyslexics have a tendency to see words as if they were reflected in a mirror, like this. Albert Einstein, Woodrow Wilson, and Nelson Rockefeller, among others, all overcame this handicap. If dyslexia is treated at the preschool stage, it can be manageable, though experts say it can never be cured. There are warning signals. Many 6-year-olds reverse their letters, but parents should be alert for the 12-year-old who does so. Some children with delayed and garbled speech turn up later with trouble reading and writing. Other signs can be disorganization, hyperactivity, clumsiness, and trouble telling left from right. Dyslexia is often inherited. Pregnancy-related difficulties, including prematurity, are other causes. The children we will see on this broadcast are the lucky ones, diagnosed and treated early. The vast majority are not. These are parents of dyslexic children, here to share their experiences at a recent Orton Society conference. The Orton Society, founded in the 1940s by the followers of the pioneer neurologist, Dr. Samuel Orton, has brought together professionals and parents to enhance their awareness of language disabilities. 8 out of 10 times, dyslexia is inherited, with the more serious cases in the male line. Joe Peel, himself a dyslexic, is the father of 2 dyslexic children.
My mother does not. My parents don't understand what my problem is at all. They never acknowledged that I had a problem. When I asked them about myself, when we started finding out about my son, I told my mother, I said, listen, he's 3.5 years old, and he should be talking by now, you know? And she said to me, you were 5 years old before you started saying anything. I said, oh, great. Now you know, more information, you know?
The stigma attached to having a child that could not learn at that time was, you know, you hid them away or you you protected them, and that's what happened to him. And it took all that time for his mother to admit that he did have a problem as a child, but we didn't do that with the children. And I felt such anxiety at the time when they said, "Oh, there's no doubt in my mind your children are, you know, brain injured, or your child needs special school." My immediate reaction was, "No, you're wrong. There's nothing wrong with my child."
For the Peel family, dyslexia is a way of life. Everything from taking telephone messages to giving directions requires careful thought. In 1970, they moved from New York City to Montauk, Long Island, to give their children an education and to live in less stressful surroundings. Anita Peel, the only one in the family without dyslexia, did not know her husband was dyslexic until their children, and then he himself, was diagnosed. He would simply find excuses for not doing any writing. He even piled his office paperwork on top of the household bills and made her feel she was not pulling her weight unless she did it all. But her training as a nurse helped her to recognize the unusual early development of her children. Both Dorothy, 17, and John, 15, had behavior and language problems, but John's were more severe.
He just wasn't talking. He would rock continuously with his crib. He would bang his head constantly. He would make a monotonous motion like this, and all the while he never spoke. He would just scream for something he wanted.
Diagnosed at 4 years old and in second grade, John is today making A's and B's at the local high school. Proof that if caught early and treated, dyslexia can be manageable.
Math teacher I had in the first semester, the first half of the year, she explained something on the board. I looked at it, and, you know, she just explained it to me, and it just didn't come through.
And now you've got another teacher? Is that?
Yeah.
And how are you working out with this new teacher?
Things are working out better with this teacher. She's there every day for extra help. Things are really starting to look good. How did you feel? What was it like growing up without knowing that you had a dyslexia problem?
I knew that there was some kind of a problem. You know, they knew that I had some kind of a problem, and they didn't know what to call it. So they called me things like lazy, or slow learner, or dumb and not interested in learning. They just wanted to force you to learn.
Joe Peel was born in Malta and educated by Dominican priests. He was taught English and can read slowly, but has significant handwriting and spelling problems. Often he reverses letters or leaves them out altogether. He has problems doing anything from reading a menu to deciphering street signs. Joe was diagnosed at 29, the same year his son John was identified as dyslexic. It was too late to reverse the negative emotions he felt about learning.
I remember occasionally being called upon to stand up and do some reading from a book or spell words, and just standing up and not being able to pronounce the words, just standing there and stuttering and searching for a word that I heard it, but I had no idea what letters made that word up. And all of a sudden you get the feeling that all the other kids are starting to look at you, and you know, you're standing there, and it's the kind of feeling that you want to forget about. You know, it's a very awkward and embarrassing time at those times. The kind of thing that I remember when I was going to school is that constant pressure of trying a little harder. If you don't get it right, then we will punish you and try and get you to do it that way.
His real education began when he emigrated to this country in 1956 and worked for IBM in their New York research labs. He learned how to operate a variety of machines and how to install offices and outfit them with computer terminals. Gradually, he became a construction manager supervising such work. But he became tired of having to bluff the fact that he had such difficulty reading and writing. He moved to Montauk, Long Island, took up commercial fishing, and started his own construction company.
IBM would send me away for, let's say, a week's seminar, send me away from home, out of town. So I'm essentially going away without my writing aid. And after sitting in a classroom for a whole week, getting the information, listening to the lecture, and so on, I knew that at the end of the week there would be that test that you always have to deal with. And what I would do is the day of the test, I packed this little gadget with me with my shaving kit. It's just a little bandage that goes on my finger very fast, and you fix it like so, and you do this kind of thing to it. And you know, you walk into a classroom looking like this. The instructor is very sympathetic, and they won't even ask whether you want to even take a verbal test. They just say, "Okay, you're excused from taking the test completely." And this kind of thing has helped me out many times. It's pulled me out of jams. I have not had to tell the instructor, "I can't read or write."
If I hold up this card and there's no clue, and I'm covering up the clues I have on the paper, can you tell me what the syllable says? Let me show you the word with it in it then. Remember the word?
Parachute.
Excellent. That's right. So the clue, the word, gives you something to picture in your mind.
Alexander is 11 and a half years old. He'd like to become a scientist. His elementary school teachers thought he was learning to read, but actually he was memorizing the stories in his books. No one picked up his problem until he was 8. In the same year, he began to learn to read with Francie Sugar, a private tutor. 3 years ago, Alexander could not read at all. He reversed letters, could not sequence sounds, and he had difficulty retrieving words from his memory. Today, he is reading, but not at the level he would like. Among other compensating techniques, his tutor helps him recognize syllables from larger word or sentence clues.
When they are learning the phonics, there's a lot of anxiety involved with these children. They have difficulty with the sequencing of the sounds. So I put a number 1 over it, so they can refer to the initial sound, the number 1 sound.
These first-grade children at PS 173 have been identified as at risk for reading failure by the Robinson Reading Clinic at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. Dr. Jeanette Jansky is educational director of the clinic and a specialist in diagnosis and treatment. In the 1950s, Dr. Jansky joined Katrina DeHirsch, a pioneer in research and treatment of dyslexia and a colleague of Dr. Samuel Orton. Together, they developed a test designed to predict reading failure in preschoolers, now widely used in the U.S. and Canada. They also developed the sentence method, which, with other approaches, is used effectively in treating children from all ages and backgrounds. Relying on private funds to keep the clinic going, they've been able to apply the technique with inner-city children in public schools surrounding the hospital. Francie Sugar is research assistant with Dr. Jansky at the clinic and is responsible for the day-to-day teaching of the children at PS 173.
The classroom teacher should introduce the child to the global picture. She should introduce the child to the sentence as a unit rather than an isolated sound as a unit.
If you begin by teaching a child what that A equals a, that may be fine for the child who's skillful in using language, but for our child, that's too abstract. They don't know where a fits into the overall reading process. So it makes much more sense to start with a larger sentence. In the context of the whole, a small detail becomes meaningful. I think the child with a reading disability is one, first of all, who's very bright. And you find reading disability in a situation where the child's reading level is substantially lower than that would be predicted by his excellent intelligence. And it exists in a situation where you can't account for the reading problem by poor teaching, by gross problems with vision or with hearing. It's not the result of emotional difficulties either, although often you find emotional difficulties in children with reading problems. the two of the mistakes that are made most frequently in working with these children are that the help comes too late, after a lot of incorrect learning has taken place, and after the child has developed all kinds of negative feelings about himself or about herself. The other problem is that the treatment has been discontinued too soon. We did develop an index out of signs that have been found to be very effective at identifying children who are likely to fail later on. A child should be using 2- and 3-word phrases by the time, just after he's 2 years of age. And he should be a reasonably good listener. He should be able to follow simple directions. And he should begin to be interested in very simple little stories by the time he's 2, 2.5, or 3. About 5, he should be speaking in sentences fluently. A very important indicator is the knowledge of letter names. Another one is the ability to name pictures rapidly and very easily. It's important to be able to repeat sentences accurately. Mastery of sentences and having reasonably adequate grammar is also important.
One young woman at the parent roundtable of the Orton Society Conference expressed anger and frustration at the convoluted path necessary for the proper diagnosis and treatment of her son. Though the child was not hyperactive, the local clinic prescribed Ritalin, a drug used to moderate the behavior of such children.
I gave it to him. An hour later, they called me from the school that my son was having a convulsion. I went to the school, and his jaw, in fact, swung back and forth. His legs were trembling, and he said, "Mommy, what's happening to me?" And the nurse said to me, "What, didn't you tell him you were putting him on medication to help him with his brain? He has a problem or something." I mean, this is the insensitivity. In September of this year, they mixed the disabilities together. They put emotionally disturbed and learning disabled children together. My son is now in a private school where he's working with a very small group of children. He goes for remediation. Suddenly, this child that was, quote unquote, very handicapped and had so many problems, who would not learn, is writing, he is reading, he just did a book report this week. He is very successful. And because I went a little further, I removed him from that special ed track, he is doing fine.
In working with these children, it's very important to communicate a sense of confidence that they're going to be able to do it. And it's very important to give them work at which you know they can succeed because they feel so badly about themselves because of the difficulties they've been having. I would say if I had to summarize briefly what's important or what's different about teaching these children how to read as compared to their children who've learned it rather easily, the point to stress is the fact that you can't take anything for granted. You can take a lot for granted about what the child who is going to learn to read easily can do. With these children, you can't. If you've taught it something once, it doesn't mean that he's going to remember it the next time he sees it. Repetition is extremely important, what we call overlearning. One goes over it and over it and over it because memory difficulties, verbal memory difficulties, are very fundamental to the kind of trouble the child is having.
This is how Delos Smith writes his name today. As a child in the 1940s, he was tutored by Katrina DeHirsch, Jansky's mentor. Under her tutelage, he overcame his inability to speak and write correctly. Then, in 1976, at the age of 41, during a music lesson, he discovered his impairment resulted from a curious reversal of images in the same way a mirror would reverse and invert an image.
December 9th, 1976 becomes that day that I will never forget because it was the turning point in my life. And at 9:30, I tried the song, "Oh My Darling Clementine," one of the great American folk songs. Instead of starting it at the beginning, I started the song at the bottom of the page and went from right to left. At 9:31, I was a mirror. All of a sudden, the musical feeling I had the first true musical experience of my life.
From then on, Smitty, an economist at the conference board, decided to write what he saw. His work could be translated to others by Xeroxing a transparency which would reverse and unscramble the message.
It's much easier for me to write from right to left. It would be much easier for me to read from right to left. But I still have no problem reading from left to right. None whatsoever. I'm very fortunate. I think you'll have to have a lot of personal motivation that you want to solve this problem. You also have to get the correct help. And I got very fine psychological help. So it's a combination of many factors, and if you're lucky to have them all work, yes, you can overcome this problem.
Just to see how your coordination, you really improved a great deal since I've seen you 3 years ago. Could you just make a pointer with your finger and touch your finger to my finger and then to your nose, back and forth?
Until you say stop?
Yeah, until I say stop.
Alexander was first diagnosed in 1977 by Dr. Arnold Gold, a neurologist and expert on learning disabilities at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital. Here, he's examining his development since then.
Same thing?
Yep.
Because I don't have any place to do it.
Great. Could you do this for me like this?
Dr. Gold's comments do not particularly apply to Alexander. They concern the doctor's long experience with a wide spectrum of learning disabled children.
Well, I look at myself as a neurologist as, one, defining what is wrong with the child, the dyslexic syndrome, if you would like, is not often an isolated disease entity. The greater majority of children often have a composite of disabilities. In other words, the child may have a reading disability, but at the same time have problems with handwriting, which would be called dysgraphia. You may have problems with spelling, or number concept difficulties, which would be called dyscalculia. The youngster may have difficulties with language, both for articulation and language content. Or he may have significant problems with coordinative skills. So one has to look at a child and determine what is his neurologic function, what are his assets, what are his deficits, where is he strong, where is he weak. Many such children also have behavioral problems of organic etiology, and this is referred to as, frequently seen as a hyperkinetic behavioral syndrome. By hyperkinesis, I mean the youngster who's overactive, with a short attention span, who's impulsive, who's distractible, who's destructive, who's aggressive, who has problems with peer relationships, subject to sibling rivalry. This is the kid that often is labeled emotionally disturbed. It presents itself as a behavioral problem, and it becomes a vicious circle because the child then encounters academic difficulties. With the difficulties, there's a psychological result in which he then becomes frustrated, he becomes angry, he develops a poor self-image, and then we have secondary emotional or psychiatric problems. So many children who have dyslexia may well have other disabilities, often have behavioral and emotional problems. And when one looks at the child or evaluates the child, one should determine the entire picture and then hopefully initiate a dynamic therapeutic program for this youngster. This is where you see. You do not see with your eyes, but you see with your brain. From this visual portion of the brain, words then come to what's called the parietal lobe or the angular gyrus. This is technical words, but it's the word storage or the word retrieval area of the brain. And then this further finds itself into a portion of the brain, the temporal lobe, where speech and hearing play an important role. This goes from here, then to the speech area of the brain, which is right here. Any interruption in this pathway from the visual portion of the brain to this word storage or word retrieval area of the brain, or to this portion where you verbalize the word, if there's any interruption or dysfunction, this child may, and often does, lack the ability to read.
What we'll do is we'll just go into the computer room.
Today, Joe Peel has returned to the kind of job for which he was trained by IBM years ago. For the next 6 months, he is working as a construction consultant, supervising the building of a computer center for the city of New York. After that, he plans to return to Montauk. The doctors and tutors tell him he can still overcome his handicap, but years of uncertainty over his future continue to haunt him.
I've been working with this present boss for over a year. Just 2 weeks ago, I decided that I was going to let him know that I had difficulty reading and writing. And he said to me, he said, I know, I've worked with you for a year, and I know that he can do the job. And it's great. I'm working now with a new set of rules that I've never worked with before. My boss knows I can't read or write. This is really a good feeling. But I still feel that had I gone to him before he hired me and said to him, listen, I have difficulty reading and writing, I don't think I'd be doing this job today. My objective is that when my son comes out into the private sector, he is recognized and he is dealt with in that fashion. Similar to other handicaps, blind people, people in wheelchairs, we would like to have the ramp, so to speak, installed for our handicap. Somehow we have to get them to learn how to identify us, possibly by wearing some kind of a symbol on our lapel button, on our lapels.
I don't want to have to pass this down, generation after generation. Have to have my kids work, be only limited to working with their hands and being a plumber or a fisherman. I want to have a good education. I want to be able to to do the things I want to do, and I want my kids to be able to do the things they want to do. A dyslexic is a dyslexic person, I feel, is a human being. It's just that he has a certain problem, and I don't think that certain problem should stop him from making a living and getting the most out of his life.
That's the important thing, is to have him live a fulfilled life as possible, given the limitations of the handicap, We're not going to be able to get certain jobs because you either can't read or write or do math or something.
Yeah.
But you can certainly be a little more productive than what we're being used for right now.
Society is constantly struggling over the resources it can provide for the needs of variously handicapped persons. Religious communities and many organizations are advocates for those without recognition and particular help or facilities. Dyslexia need not be the permanent or disabling condition it once was. Early diagnosis and special education are effective remedies. It remains for parents, teachers, and all of us to be partners in eliminating the unnecessary consequences of this invisible and painful handicap.